Hello, welcome to this next video set. In this little set we're going to start off in MD and we're going to prep our model for export. So we're going to use this vest which I created in another set, and what we'll do is prep it for export. We'll have a look at a few considerations and then we'll export it and import it into MD and build up a few texture layers, and we'll start with it looking like this and we'll end up with it looking like this, which is in the render view in Substance. So I hope you're looking forward to it. I hope you'll get something out of this, and I will talk to you in the next video. Okay, so we've got our project here, and we need to do a few changes and a few little processes to get it, ready for export. So first of all, we'll go to the UV editor, and then we're going to arrange these in this 0 to 1 space, something along these lines. So this is one I've done before, but you will probably be seeing everything grouped at the middle point here, but if you first go and just with nothing selected reset to 2V UD arrangement, you'll get it set to that essentially. Just like your, the arrangement in the sim room. So the idea is that we want to fit these into a square with as little as wasted space as is humanly possible. And that can be awkward sometimes, especially with lots of little trims like we've got here. But it's, doable. So these bits here aren't too bad. We can just grab these two bits and move those down into the square. Doesn't matter if we get this fitting straight away, we can refit in just a few moments, well, hopefully a few moments. And now we've just got to get all of these pieces into the same place. Now I believe that if I rotated these 90 degrees I might get a little bit of extra space out of this. It's not something I particularly like to do. I prefer to have them, in the, the way they were done. But if I go around to 90 degrees there, I've got shift held down so that I'm snapping. We can then start to arrange these pieces in here. And the reason I've gone in that direction is because I can kind of loop and overlap these depending upon the direction of their curve. Try and get them in a little bit. Match the curves so that I can get a couple close together. Don't get them too close together, because if they're too close they may overlap each other. Not visibly, but with the bleed you get when the UV is baked, you have a tendency to then overlap if they're really close. So not too close together. Okay, so that's quite nice. Let's move these to down into here. Actually, it'd be better if I put the shorter ones above, and then I can pull these down. And then it's just these last bits we need to pop in there. It's not too much I can do about their height, unfortunately, but I think that might do the job. That might be a little too close to that edge. There we go. So then select everything, right click, and then fit to 0, 1, and it will automatically fit it into the space as best it can. So as I said, the idea is to get as much space on there as is humanly possible. If all of your UVs are this size, you're only going to utilize a quarter or a very small proportion of your texture image, and that's going to lose you some crispness in your resolution. So we just right click and fit again. There we go. Okay, so that's the UV. In the next one we're going to prep the mesh. We'll update the particle distance, therefore the the mesh density, and we'll get it ready to export out. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so let's go back to the sim room and just focus in on our models here. So select everything, press F, and I've got the mesh view on. If you haven't, it's one of these options here. So that's flat shaded, that's the mesh view, and you'll see that we have quite big blocky polygons, or at least by comparison, and that's not necessarily very good. It looks okay in Marvelous Designer, but it's not necessarily going to look okay elsewhere. So just as a demonstration of that, I've exported this at this resolution and imported it into Modo, and you can see that around the back you get a lot of kind of crinkly, jagged, nasty, horrible polygons, and this is sort of exacerbated slightly by a surface normal. Substance Painter will export a surface normal to help smooth out the mesh, and if you manage to delete that in the process, it looks even worse. So we need a little bit of extra geometry here, and we need to be a little bit careful about it. It depends upon your application. If you're doing a still, and you just want it to look flowing and lovely, and it's not going to move around, you could use quite a high resolution, because you're not going to animate it, it's not going through any cloth sims, it's not going to drag your machine down to a snail's pace. If you're going to use it for something else, you might actually have a really low poly one, and then bake that with a higher poly mesh, but for this one I'm going to go somewhere in the middle. So with all pieces selected, I'm going to select my particle distance in the properties, and I'll set it down to 10, and when that finishes you should see that settles down quite nicely. It's reasonably dense. I could probably do it for a conforming piece of cloth, but not perhaps in full simulation. So let's just go in, and even though I've done that, it's not actually changed the sim. I need to let the sim run now. So let's just set the sim going and let that settle out. There we go. Because I've got a better resolution, a finer mesh, it's actually going to put in some better folds and such like, because it has more flexibility in the mesh. It's able to flex where previously it wouldn't have done. Okay, so let's have a look. You could pull it around a little bit if you wished, just to try and encourage the folds in any particular direction you may have wanted them to be in. It's not, you can't ultimately control the folds. It's down to the properties of the mesh and the the dynamic animation, not animation, the cloth properties that you set, the physical properties that you set on these pieces of geometry, and how Marvelous Designer then interprets them. So yeah, you can't force them, but you can influence them a little bit. Okay, so I can see down there I have the potential for some jagged pieces, so I'm just sort of teasing it a bit to try and get those out. There we go. Okay, so now that is done, I can stop the sim. That is ready for export. Now, with all pieces selected, it's File, Export, Object Selected, and I'm going to export two here. I'm going to export an unwelded one, So select all patterns, turn off select all trims, single object, unwelded thin, unified coordinates, untick diffuse and normal because we're going to do that separately, and then my scale I've got M, which is meters and just happens to correspond to my modo, and then save absolute texture image file path. Okay, so that should do the job, and then I'll click OK. And then for an example purpose, I'm going to export, when I remember where it is, a welded version. And we'll just have a quick look in Substance then as to the difference between the two and why you might want to use the unwelded one in the texturing process. Okay, so there we go. All I need to do now is switch that to weld and export. Okay. Right, so we need some maps. You know, we want to take the information that we've got from our Substance texture and export it, bake it into some image maps, and we'll do that in the next video. Okay, so we baked the textures in the UV room, so let's switch over to that, into the UV editor. And at the top we have this little tool here, Bake Textures. So if I click on that, I can set my path. You'll see I've already tested, and click on Save. I need to give it a name first, Foolish Bam. There we go, Tank, and Save. And I'm using 4096 maps because I want to get good detail, and I've got the UV area 0 to 1, which is just this area here. If you're using the UDIM workflow, you can of course use all tiles, or you can select a particular tile. And then underneath that I've got diffuse, metalness, normal and roughness. It would output an opacity map, but I haven't got anything on it, so there's no point. So if I just click Save there, that should do the job. Takes a moment or two, and then does nothing, so just hit Close then. Okay, so we've got our baked maps now, and we've got our exported model. In the next video we'll start to look at getting that into Substance Designer and setting up the project to give us a starting point. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so I've just imported all three of my exported models into Modo as a demonstration. So you can see that the low poly one is quite jagged, and this is the higher poly unwelded, and this is the higher poly welded. Now what you can find on the higher poly welded is that where you've got these edges that are welded together, and you've got three pieces coming off one edges, so I've got one there, but I also have one there. You can often find that you'll get black burn marks in them. I'm lucky on this one, I haven't. I get them quite a lot, and I'm remarkably but pleasantly surprised that it hasn't come out. So if you get any black odd marks on your mesh, you might find that you've got a welded mesh and there's just an issue with it whereby it's not quite sure where the normal is, and then you get these little black burn marks. Otherwise this is the unwelded one, and you know, they both look pretty identical. So let's go over to Substance Painter and start off our project. Excuse me while it boots up. I think my PC is probably under strain at the moment. There we go. So let's close that, and we'll do a file and new project, PBR metallic roughness with alpha blend. I'll select my welded tank because that one looks alright. Set my doc res to 4096 and normal map to DirectX. Everything else is fine, and then I'll click OK. And there we have it. We can see that, you know, there is some kind of jaggedness and artifacts about the mesh. You could, you know, in your intermediate modeling program, just smooth that out a little bit, but for the purposes of this, we're just going to go as it is. Okay, so now this is in here, we're ready to bring the maps in, and we'll do that in the next section. Okay, so bringing our baked maps in is very straightforward. I'm just going to go and find my directory. There it is. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. There we go. And all we need to do is select our maps and drag and drop them onto the library. So once that's done, you'll get this little import option. If you left click below these and just drag up, it will select them all. We need to set these to texture because they're texture maps. Import your resources too. I'll import them to the current session because I don't need to reuse them, they're specific to this model. And then click import, and it will very helpfully then filter my library and show me those maps. So to apply them to the model, we delete this paint layer and then add a fill layer. And once that's added, I'm going to take off everything I don't need. I've got no height, so I've got colour, roughness, metal and normal. And it's just a question of dragging and dropping the right map onto the right piece. So my normal goes into my normal, and that should have applied. You can see if I go closer, we've now got that surface texture in there. We've got roughness into roughness, metallic into metallic, and diffuse into diffuse. And now it should look pretty much exactly the same as it does in MD, except for the mesh differences, where it looks smoother in MD than it does here. We can see we've got quite a nice kind of sheen. It's all going. We've got our stitches because we added the stitches but we didn't export them, so they've just come out on the map, which is very helpful. Okay, so now it's a question of using, you know, a little bit more power in Substance to, you know, do something to this and give it some character, and we'll have a look at a few options for that in the next video. I'll talk to you then. Okay, so as always, our first point of call is to bake the maps out. So let's do that quickly. So I'm going to go to my texture set settings and then to the texture maps here, and then bake the maps out. So I don't need an ID, and my ambient occlusion and curvature I'm going to update to about half and half for both, and then we'll examine the maps and rebake if necessary. There we go, and bake selected textures, and that will go off and do our maps based on the mesh. There we go, lovely. So let's switch to our ambient occlusion map, and we can see, yeah, where we've got some folds and such like, we've got some quite broad occlusion. That's not too bad, that's quite nice. We've got a little bit of annoyance in here, but I think we could probably deal with that with some blurs and such like. And let's have a look at the curvature map. So let's have a look there. And again, most of it's sort of like a grey, you know, a mid flat grey, because the curvature is minimal. But up where, you know, we've got our trims on there, we've got some black indicating we've got a big curve one way, and some white, which means we've got a big curve in the opposite direction, and that looks pretty good. You can refine if you wish, but I think that's alright for us to get started with. Okay, so what else? That's it for baking the maps. We're ready to go. So in the next we'll start to have a look at perhaps changing some colours, adding some detail, adding some dirt even possibly, and we'll see where we go from there. Okay, so let's add some text to this. So what I'm going to do is add a fill layer above, and I'm going to add the text to the mask. So let's add a mask first, and then on that mask we'll add a paint layer. Just remove this filter up here, and then on our alphas we'll type in font, oops, not fonty, and it will give me a choice of the fonts I've got. So I'm just going to be generic about it. Let's see what I can think of. So let's select one first. I'll select this one, and down here we have, under the alpha, it's got some parameters and we can put some text in this. So I don't know, what should we put? Go team, something along those lines. And if I then point at the screen, we can add that in. So all I'm controlling here is the mask. We can control how this appears on our texture using the actual layer itself. So let me just paste that on, and then on the layer let's make it black. Oops, didn't mean to click there. So I'm not going completely black, I'm just going sort of a semi kind of near black, and if we zoom in we can see that that's kind of integrated into the actual shirt itself and not done an awful lot else. But let's do a little bit of jiggery pokery. So let's take our opacity and emissions off, and we can add a little height. So let's find the height one. Oops, I've taken the height off. There we go. I'll just add a little height there to give it a bit of relief from the t-shirt, so it's kind of stuck on, printed on, like you get sometimes with kind of thicker printing. We could increase or decrease the roughness. I'm going to make it a little rougher so it's distinct from the shirt itself. Metallic I'm going to probably turn off. Actually, I don't think I need that one. And normal I'm going to turn off because we're not using that either. So now we have a logo. Well, not a logo, but just some text on there that we can do various things with. So nothing very exciting there. We didn't really do anything spectacular except put some text in. But what we're going to do next is add that height level to the normal map. So let's pause here and I'll talk to you in a moment. Okay, so I don't really want a height map on here. What I want is for it to be in a normal map. So what we're going to do is take our height information, combine it with the normal, and then we're going to overlay that normal onto our original normal. So I've just jacked my height up to 1 just to give it some depth, and then I'm going to take this layer and copy it above. So I've just renamed this to text, so that's our text layer, and then right click and duplicate. Now for this layer the only thing we need is our normal, so we can turn everything else off, and we just need to make a couple of adjustments so that it can pick up the height information below it and convert it into a normal map. So first of all, I'm going to right click here and add a filter, and then on the filter we'll go height to normal, and that gives us some options. And as you can see, nothing's happened at the moment because there is no height information for it to be pick up. We need to tell it where to get that from. So if I use this base color and height, and this drop down and pick the height channel, I can change the mode from L dodge to pass through, and now it should be picking it up. So let's go and have a look at our normal channel. There we go, and we can see that that normal map is now added to the one below it. But I don't just want to add it, what I want to do is kind of replace it. I don't want there to be that grain in there. So what we can do for that is change our mode. So if I go and select the normal layer and change it for an MDT to normal, you'll see that that goes away, and I've got a nice smooth surface on my text. I don't have the grain, so it's going to end up as if, you know, it's a kind of thick transfer on top which is obscuring the grain underneath. So let's go back to our material view. That's good. Now one thing now is, and you may not be able to see it very well, but I'll show you in just a sec, is that we've got a normal map and we've got a height map, and I don't want the height map. So what I need to do is overwrite it. So if I add a layer above this and turn off everything except height, I can override what's going on underneath, and we do that by going to height and changing it from L dodge to normal, and you'll see that that has then gone away. If I take that off, turn it off and on again, I'm just using the normal map now. So let's go to our height channel. There we go. It's not very exciting, is it? So everything's black, and if I turn it off, we've got this white go team. You could, if you wanted to preserve some height from other pieces, copy the mask over. So if I select on this mask here and copy mask, and then select on our override layer and paste into mask, and then turn that on, you'll see it just masks that little area. So that's perfect. So let's name these. We'll call this one text normal, and we'll call this one height override. There we go. So just to keep things tidy, what we could do is put these all into one folder. So let's do that. So if I select all my layers now that I want to be in there, I can drag and drop it onto that folder, and I'll pop in text layers. And you know, as we add more and more to this texture, you know, it can be handy to be able to quickly identify which layers are doing what. So folders is a good way of doing that. Okay, so that's that. In the next one we'll start to add some broader detail, some broader dirt, and I will talk to you then. Let's put a kind of a dirt layer over this to kind of make it look less perfect. So we'll add a fill layer, and then right click and add a black mask, and on that mask let's use a generator, and we use the dirt generator. So when it comes up, you're not likely to see it very well because of the white on white nature of this, or the grey on grey. So what I'm going to do is take my base colour and take it down to black for the moment, and now we can very clearly see, you know, where everything's going. So that's kind of okay, but what I want to do is just adjust it a bit. So on the fill layer, on the mask and then the dirt, we can change some of these parameters. So let's take the dirt level down a touch and the contrast down, and taking the contrast down will soften up some of the places. You'll see that if I take the contrast right up, we get really black kind of merges in there, and if I take it down a little bit, we should get much softer, less intense areas. The grunge amount I'm going to take up perhaps a little bit to give an overall kind of level, and the scale I like to take down a little bit just to make sure that I'm not getting any repeats. So if I go really high on this, you'll start to see it repeats, and it's just because the the grunge map is tiling. So I think personally, if you can, a lower value is slightly better. There we go. Okay, so once you've got your pieces as you want them, or your dirt map as you want, we can go to the layer and actually set some properties here. So I don't want the height, I don't want normal, opacity or emission, rough and metal. There is some metal in this kind of texture. You see where it's kind of picking up the light on the threads. So what I can do is either turn that right up or turn it sort of somewhere down to dull out some of those areas. And for roughness, I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So if I turn it up a lot, you'll see it's literally dirt. There's it's obscuring underneath completely. But if I draw it back a bit, you'll see that it kind of blends in a little better. There we go. And now it's a question of the colour. Essentially, it's too dark. So let's take that down to a lighter grey, just so that it's there, but it's not overwhelming. Maybe even a tiny bit lighter than that. I mean, if you make it white, it's going to be really pale, but if we sort of start to move it down just gently until you can just see it, and you might wonder if it's there at all, and if that is the case, you can use your layer filter here or layer visibility to turn it off and on, just to see the effect it is happening. I can see that over these edges it might be a bit shiny, so yeah, I think I need to turn that metallic up a little bit, and perhaps the roughness up a little bit as well. There we go. Okay, so that has gone over everything, including our text, which you might imagine it would, but it's not really integrated with the text. So what I want to do in the next video is add to that dirt layer the normal information from this text, so that it integrates it into the dirt generator. So I'll talk to you then. Okay, so now we want to add this text into the dirt generator, so that the height information, or rather the normal information now that we have in there, is used. So first of all, in our text layers, we want our normal layer, and to that layer we'll add an anchor point. There we go. Sorry, I had a moment there. So it's called text normal, so it's easy to identify. And then on our dirt generator here, we can go down to the bottom, and you'll see I've been practicing. So in this micro normal area, we can click the anchor point and select it, and then for the reference channel we'll change that to normal, because there's no other information on this layer and we need the normal information. Okay, so that's not the end of the process. We now need to activate it. So under micro details, just turn it from micro normal false to true, and then it will add it in. So if I go to the mask, it's kind of easy to see what's going on there. So now we can see that there is some information in there, and if we turn it off, it's not. We've got these sliders here that we can use to affect how it chimes in. Then the height details intensity doesn't seem to do a lot, but curvature intensity, we've got the AO radius, so we can make it really strong, and the AO depth, we can make it really strong. So you've got all sorts of sliders that you can use to, you know, get it to just how you want it. And I want it enough so it's noticeable, but not enough so it's kind of overwhelming. So let's switch back to our material layer. There we go. Now we can see that there is a bit of dirt around that text, as you kind of might expect. If it's raised up and there's like an edge, something to catch in, then you might get dirt, you know, building up there, or wear or something. Sorry, I just punched the microphone. Okay, so that's that. Now I might think about adding some kind of distress to the model, give it, you know, a little bit of wear here and there. So we'll do that in the next video. Okay, so I want to pop another layer on top of this, so we'll add a layer in, and so I can see it, I'm just going to switch it to black, and then we'll add in a black mask, and we're going to add a couple of pieces, I think. So first of all, I'm going to add a fill layer, and to that fill layer I'm going to go and find a grunge texture. So let's type in grunge up there. That will give me a bunch of options, and let's have a look at, let's try this one, grunge leaks. We'll drag and drop that on there, and that gives us something that's not too bad actually. It's quite nice. It's obviously too black, but you know, that's just because we're, you know, got it black so we can see what's going on. So we can adjust this a little bit. I can take the balance down or up, make it stronger or lighter. I can make it more definite by taking the contrast up, or a little bit softer by taking it down, and we can even invert it if we wanted to. Oh, that's really fancy, isn't it? I like that. Okay, so now it's a question of deciding how you want that to merge with your underlying texture. So this one actually, I really like the pattern. I don't know why, but I really do. So I was thinking of having it a little bit more visible than I perhaps thought in the first place. So let's take our colour and we'll take that down a little bit. There we go, somewhere around there. And if you're worried that, you know, it's actually so subtle nobody's noticing, you can turn it off and see what actual effect it's having on you. Other things we do with this, well, we take the height off, and we take the normal off, because we don't need those and those and those. Probably don't need the metal either. So now it's a little bit more integrated, but it's very shiny, and I would prefer it to be the other way around. So I'm just going to increase my roughness till it's somewhere, you know, kind of blending in a little bit. If you wanted your t-shirt to be, you know, super rough, then, you know, you can increase it even further. There we go. So it's actually going over the top of my kind of Go Team mask there. So I'm just going to copy that mask and see what I can do with it. It's here somewhere. So I can't actually directly copy it, which is kind of annoying, but I can copy that effect. And can I paste it up here? Paste effect, there we go. So now that's kind of overridden it completely. If I turn it off, we'll see that it comes back on again. but what I want to do is kind of blend those together. So let's try a multiply or a subtract perhaps. I think that's what I was going for. So now if I view the mask, it's often the best way to see it. You see that the mask, the text is entirely black, which is how it should be, and everything else is coming through. This, I think this might be a bit too much, so I'm going to darken it up a bit. I don't want it to be over everything, I just want it to be a bit more subtle. Let's contrast. There we go, somewhere around there. I don't want the whites to be too blown out. Okay, if you want even more control over this, we could add levels above this. So if I right click and add levels, we've got our black and white input controls. So on to have more black and less white here, I think. And I think if I take my grey in that direction, it will give me a little bit more to work with. Take the white down. There we go. Then that's you know, going to make it even more subtle. So let's go back to our material view, and there we are. It may actually not look like you've done an awful lot as you're looking at it, because everything is, you know, reasonably subtle. But you know, that's just a bit of a taster as to what you can do. And of course, you could go in here. You could add stamps. You could add colour. You can do all manner of things. But in the end, you know, you'll end up with a much, you know, nicer, much more enhanced, much more detailed texture map than you will if you just use MD. Although MD has got a lot in it, you know, there is quite a lot of power in there to do things. Okay, so that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful, and I'll talk to you again in another set.